right, so we're back, the House Transportation Committee on continuing our work this afternoon. So we took a brief break. We're continuing our work on the draft of our T-bill and in relation to H693, working with our legislative council. So welcome everyone back. Hope you got to stretch your legs during the break. Some people got to run during a break. So, and as Anthea is pulling up her screen, just to round the committee back, we had just done
Section 15.
section 15.
Okay. So if you are in H693, which I'm about to put up, you will be on page 29, at the bottom of page 29. Okay. So this was requiring the Agency of Transportation, in consultation with existing nonprofit mobility services organizations in the state of Vermont, that provide Vermonters with transportation alternatives to like having their own vehicle, to develop a written plan to determine what programmatic elements need to be in place to allow for the expansion of car sharing in Vermont. Subsection B goes through the minimums of what the plan needs to cover. And then subsection C has when the plan needs to be filed with the House and Senate Committees on Transportation, and that's November 15th of 2024. And the I can go through the minimums in subsection B. We've gone through them before, but they're basically like, how do we expand the use of car sharing in Vermont? What's the financial support that's going to be needed? What are nonprofit and for-profit entities that could be involved? Basically the how to do report.
Yeah, so I think we need to have a little bit of committee discussion about this. We've heard some testimony, and I think we heard, I'm just refreshing myself from my notes, and I think it's, there's a report that's suggested here, a nonprofit car sharing report, and I have in my notes that might be possible. I know we're not talking about the money, we're talking about the policy, but I think there seems to be a lot of policy and money. So I just wanted to open it up to some committee discussion to get your thoughts, because we've had a bit of testimony from folks on this. Representative Burke?
Yeah, I feel that this type of thing, car sharing or mobility for all, micro-middle, whatever we're calling it, it really fills a gap in our transportation system. We know that we have a good public transit system for what it is. I'll say on fixed routes, we're trying to incentivize the MTI grants and micro transit operations, but I think that we're hearing from Chris Cole and his organization and what Annie is doing in Burlington, especially with low-income people. I think it's important. It could be an important part of our system of providing transportation for all.
And so what are you
Well, I think the report would be a good idea. I don't know what it's going to cost. I guess we'd have to talk about that. But just to help us, how reports help us move along towards goals. We're not just going to say, oh, we're going to, it's just, I don't, that's my feeling. I don't know if anybody.
some of the highlights of this, there are details in this language about, feasibility,
Right. Yeah, they tried car sharing in Montpelier, and apparently didn't work. But maybe with a more study in other communities, I don't know what kind of study they did ahead of time. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think other, was there a hand over here?
Yeah, no, thank you, Madam Chair. No, I think just echoing that, I think, I'm hearing from constituents that, you know, the challenges of fixed routes and how this would, you know, a lot of organizations like parent-child centers that are providing transportation help, and this could really be of major assistance for a lot of them. I don't know if it would help sort of set the stage to create like maybe more partnerships as well with organizations that, you know, really need either for their business, for employees, or, you know, for human services type things. It seems like the people who really have a stake in getting somewhere but cannot afford to buy, this is the sweet spot that we're trying to hit.
Representative Walker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was trying to find my notes on the part. Perhaps when we take testimony, there's multiple tests or pilot programs going on in this similar area. They're looking at one in St. Albans, I remember hearing, and in a couple of other places where there's more expansion of this already happening. Will those programs bring back the information that we're looking for in this piece?
I just remember.
That's a micro
That's a
transfer.
micro
Yeah.
Which I think is a little bit different than car sharing. I mean, I have to say,
Okay.
for me, it took me a little while to parse apart all the different names of the programs with the different mobility and transit. So I very much appreciate that question. I think Car Share Vermont is an example of one of the, of a car sharing program that's in Burlington, and Andy Borden came in with the Transportation for Vermonters group, and we got some testimony that day. I'm looking over at Michelle because you're in my site on site, that you might be able to clarify and help with Representative Walker's question. Because when in your testimony, you gave some agency testimony on this section.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Michelle Boone-Fowler, Vermont Agency of Transportation. So indeed, we have a number of pilots going on through the MTI grant program and through other transit resources for microtransit pilots, including the one you heard from Chris Cole about, which is a Mobility for All pilot, another microtransit type example. We have provided funding for the Montpelier car share pilot in the past, and have offered, you know, and have worked with Car Share Vermont in a supportive manner on different piloting of different car share applications for like low-income housing centers and different approaches for car sharing. The MTI grant program would support any entity around the state that wanted to do a car sharing program if they put together an application and were successful. And so I think there's not a lack of resources. It's more a lack of finding a model that works in terms of having sustainable staffing to clean the car every day, and you know, all the things that go along with you know, it's sort of beyond finding a volunteer driver that just, you know, but there's a lot more to it in terms of the technology that has to be in the car. You have to have the key fob, you have to have a reservation making system, and then the cleaning of the car and the servicing and all those things. So I'm not sure how much more there is to study about this. I think if Car Share Vermont were interested in expanding further or doing other areas maybe different than Montpelier, I certainly know they could come to us for an MTI grant application to pilot another area. So that's, I guess, about all I would offer on that. Representative Shaw?
Thanks. After hearing Chris Cole testify last week, I think I'm not opposed to car share, having some car share language in the bill. I'm just trying to figure out what the sweet spot is, because here there's a whole lot of words that I think, and after hearing Chris testify, a lot of those are, he seems to have a plan that he's been working with Ross and with GMT moving forward. I wonder if we could benefit from his organization. It's not Capstone because they're different. They separated from Capstone.
Yeah, community rides.
Community rides, yeah. And so I'm wondering if there's a way we can say what we want to say, but with a lot fewer words. And get the same results. And sometimes that's hard to do, but just wondering because it seems like we've got kind of a foundation started, kind of a building.
Well, he's not car share. He has totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris is.
Chris is encouraging, but he has the technology and he has the knowledge.
Well, I mean, he has the knowledge, but it's a totally different concept than
Right.
car share. So I don't know what you would gain from him. At least, yeah, but anyways.
Okay, so I'll back all that up.
Yeah.
I guess though, I would say, I think he does talk about how, I mean, I'm pulling up his presentation now. Car sharing is in relation, or it's adjacent and part of, like, remember the Buzz Lightyear slide that he shared?
Yeah.
And so it was on that slide, so.
His is not, yeah, on like on demand. His is more micro transit, just for a lower.
So- Yeah, I just wanted to suggest maybe a way to sort of think about this is car share is one of our tools for encouraging people or and enabling them to live car light, but it seems like it's for people who have the option to choose, they have to choose, right? They're choosing that over ownership.
Yeah.
Whereas the other program is really more directed for people in different circumstances, economically. So, I'm just wondering, context seems to matter greatly in terms of the success of this. I'm trying to remember why the Montpelier pilot didn't succeed.
I'm just wondering, it seems
Like they're different.
well, rather than discussing idea, like, I feel like what we're striving to find is how do we get some words on the page? And I'm wondering if a couple of people might want to work on it. I don't know if that's amenable, because I think what I'm hearing is that there's some support for something like this, but maybe it's not the report. So anyway, we can continue. Yeah, Representative.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, what I think they have, so car share, I thought we heard testimony that it's not gonna work in a small town. It's only gonna work with a certain level, maybe in Bennington, maybe in St. Johnsbury, I don't know. But there's a model that's working. And then on microtransit, there's some more tests going out. And I don't know that it's working, but it's working enough to expand it and try it in a couple other places. And so we're getting some information on that. And then the testimony from Chris, that's another kind of model out there. Each of these models require a local drive, I think, to help it. And, for me, it would be interesting to have a report that sort of defines these different methods out there that would fit in different towns, and describe how they get funded, whether it's all grant or not, how they work, what the resources are. And so a town like Heinsberg or St. Johnsbury could look at this and, if they almost all need a local volunteer group that's willing to drive it, but they could sort of look and say, this is the one that probably could work here. So rather than just car share, I think you almost need that for the four different sort of models that are out there. And it sounds like we're doing that now with microtransit. We're sending out some tests. So, if there was a report, I think something like that sort of, helps a town, a municipality, helps us look at what's working and how the model works, what's required and what the resources would be.
So I'm just thinking about how I want to hear allow some more discussion, but I can come back to this idea of like, are there a couple people who would want to work on something to bring back to the committee?
I just have a question on
Sure. Yes, what's
is there something posted on the AOT website that says like car share? Micro transit? Where, you know, like, is there a place they can go and these are the 4 current programs available in Vermont? And I don't know.
I hear what you're asking,
Okay.
and I think what Representative Couch described is not a tool that we have in our toolbox right now that could really give an energy committee or a select board or somebody, a nonprofit, sort of the roadmap of what it would look like if I wanted to adopt one of these in my community.
Yeah.
I think that could be a useful tool. And so we would be happy to work with the language developers on coming up with something if that was of interest to the community.
That's
Is
what I'm
it-
thinking.
yeah,
It's,
it's a
you know,
committee.
it's like a one-stop shop. Oh, our community's interested in that. We can go to the AOT website and look at what car share provides or micro
Right, we kinda
transit
do
or
a
something. Yeah.
template or something like
Right.
a startup kit.
Yeah.
I want to, Representative Walker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as the discussion part goes, I feel like it sounds like micro transit, car share is potentially a subset of that, another project. It's a fair amount of research and development in a way that is going on in a lot of different communities. But as we raise expectation of these different programs and they have funding requirements, and we look at that, we spend a huge amount of time on the public transit that exists today and the lack of a long-term funding structure and or plan of exactly how to fund all of those things. So I just want to be very careful about, we keep doing programs, which I'm not against, and I look at them in sort of an R&D finding areas, but we raise expectations in that case, raise financial pressures. We haven't solved the financial pressures of the programs and the public transit we have today, and we are looking at increasing the amount of opportunities out there. Now, I'm not against the research and development and finding more models that work and adjust as society changes, but we've got funding issues on public transit that people rely on every day right now. And we're adding new ones, and we really need to be sure where we're going to get that money to keep the ones that go from there.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I think we all can appreciate that, because I think we have heard, like, we've gotten 2 reports around public transit, but we have also gotten some testimony that are there ways to deliver these services that are more cost effective, like that don't require a bus going down a road on a fixed road, or, you know, so I'm just wondering, like, I'm not saying one way or the, I think I would like to be able to, if the committee supports somebody, like, I see Representative Pouch, would you be willing to work with the agency to just to come up with some language to bring back to the committee in the next couple of days?
And I think, you know, in this, I'll say, one-stop shopping in there would also be to understand how the Medicare is done. So people, you know, if the Energy Committee or a select board was looking, they see all the ways that transportation they can be supported in transportation in non-bus served areas.
Medicaid.
Yeah, that's because that's a piece of it, you know, so even though it's already running and whatnot, but I think, you know, being on this committee, it's taken a year for me to understand what's out there, and it's still not that clear sometimes.
Because I mean, I think it'd be great if you're willing to do it, and does anyone want to join? No. Okay, so just, we gotta be really fast, though, this is like really quick, so connect with Michelle.
So we'll break for 15 minutes, you come back.
Yeah,
with-
exactly. Thank you very much. Great, yeah. So, and I just want to say, you know, to Representative Walker's point, I think I at least really appreciate what you're saying, you know, like about the cost pressures. And I think that car share is looking at maybe, you know, I think exploring making a toolkit or something. I think what I just heard here was like the idea of like, is there a way to share an AOT's website or like a tool that our energy committees in our towns can tap into, you know, being kind of a startup kit or something like that. I'll let the smarter people know to figure some of that out. But Representative Burke, I saw your hand up too.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of get back to the MTI grants. I mean, the MTI grants are mobility, transportation, innovation grants. And that's, you know, those kind of projects can come out of that. And we do have a fair amount of funding for that this year. And I think, and I'm also just wondering if some of that funding would get directed to, well, I'm just hearing that the Car Share Vermont is doing a program for, they pay some of the membership costs for low-income people who don't have any vehicles at all. So I'm just wondering if we can, we're getting into funding discussions now. I'm just proposing that maybe some of that MTI funding could get, it is an innovative program, could get directed there. I don't know whether that's possible. And I'm still not clear whether MTI can be used for operating expenses too, so. Just,
So that's something that we are gonna. take into
yes, that
discuss.
sounds just, I'm getting a
Yeah.
little bit further out of the conversation, but I just wanted to bring up the idea of using the MTI or specifying in the MTI
Well,
program.
that's our next section, so hold that thought, yeah, so great, I think with this one, we're gonna come back, possibly, we're gonna come back with some new language. Thank you. Great.
Okay, so I feel like this has been like a good leading segue to section 17, which does two things. It has, and this is an appropriation because it's not the T bill, it would be an authorization in the T bill or one of those charts. The sum of $750,000 is appropriated for the Mobility and Transportation Innovation Grant Program. So that's like one piece. And then the second piece is that for purposes of the implementation, this is what was setting up that like not priority scheme for rural projects, but rather the like early window to be in contact with the Agency of Transportation to work on the application. So the Agency of Transportation needs to establish an early application for applicants that are seeking a grant award for a project in a rural community. And the early application needs to allow applicants to have at least 2 months to work with the Agency of Transportation to present a grant application that like will, to the greatest extent practicable, meet the requirements that are set by the Agency of Transportation. And if you think back to when Michelle and I were sitting up here, we pulled up when historically the applications had been, window had been opened. I think it was in September. So this would be sort of requiring that 2 months going to about the beginning of the fiscal year if the agency sticks with what has been like the historic timeline from the MTI grant program. And that's going to take you to the end of the section. So there's money here, but then there's also like the policy discussion of whether or not you want to have not priority for rural projects, but early window to work on application for rural projects between the applicant or the intended applicant and the Agency of Transportation.
And I think the section above it too is also like number one,
For both capital and operational costs. Yes, sorry, that is also a policy change from my understanding is how the MTI grants have been usable in the past.
So we heard some testimony about this, but how does the committee put the money question aside, but for the policy, the discussion, the early kind of application window, which we heard from the agency that that's really not a problem to do that. And I think I also heard, so how, I'll take number 2 first, or folks, let me see this whole thing. Representative Lally?
Oh, I have in my notes that, that 90% of the MTI grants are currently going to support rural, so, so maybe just a longer application period for everybody would be helpful.
I think it's like a pre-application, right? I think that the language in here, I'll let Michelle kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Madam Chair, what I would say is that we're happy to move the application period earlier to provide more time between announcement and when the applications are due. And we're happy to work with every town in the state that needs assistance on a pre-application basis to answer questions, et cetera, help them get the resources they need to make an application that will be competitive. I think we would prefer to shy away from a system that could be deemed inequitable. And so, and because the rural communities obviously are already well engaged with making these grants, I don't perceive that there's a competitiveness issue there. I think the only, we do this with, there's a grant program, can't remember if it's the Transportation Alternatives Program or the Bike Ped Program, where we even open up the application period before the budget is passed, with the caveat in the language that awards are pending, approval of the budget. So we have a significant amount of runway we can work with to affect the outcome that you're looking for.
So are people in support of that, like opening up the window for the shop?
So I have that note, everybody has notes. on that.
Yeah.
Says possibly new language coming in from either Dan Courier or Michelle to line up our timeline
Okay.
with
I can get that.
current practices. Anybody remember that?
I didn't write that note, but that's possible that I just didn't write that note. But would that be
So-
possible? Yeah,
Yes, I'll get
Yeah,
that for you tomorrow.
that would be, I think that'd be. Seeing the committee just nod its head, seems like it makes a lot of sense. Great, that'd be great, Michelle.
Mhm.
Thank you. And then I just think the clarification around like the grants, I've just heard different things. And I just like the grants will be available for both capital and operational costs.
Okay, we'll clarify that.
And I think, is it the sense of the committee? I mean, we've heard from different folks about the value of having it be both, like, because I'd rather limit it to only capital. To operate some of these innovative programs, they need to have some flexibility, so. I think it might be helpful is the committee interested in that? That's a policy decision for us. Yes, no?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, to be able to make it available for both capital and operating costs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, I just, this is like for, yes, I need to hear, is anybody opposed to that? Okay, all right, so we might need some language. Is that true, Anthea?
I would need to go back and look at the original language from 2020 to
Okay.
see if it limited it or if that was just how it had been interpreted by the Agency of Transportation. And then it would be a question for the agency as to whether or not they would change it without being told.
Okay.
And then it sounds like the shifting of the timeline would not require anything in session law because that was not established in 2020 Acts and Results number 121. And then there's just the piece about money. So it could be that you don't need anything on the policy. You just need the agency to say that they're going to do it. It could be that even if the agency says that they're going to do it, you still want to include it. So you're stating in the bill what the change in policy is going forward, and then you'll have to deal with the money. So I think maybe what makes sense.
The money issue. Well, this is where we're gonna talk about we're gonna have the money conversation. This is one of the areas where the agency is recommending $3 million. So for this, so in the governor's recommended budget. So, yeah, but we will have that part. But I see some more hands. Representative Walker?
Thank you. It's not sure. It's a question along the lines of, we were talking about the capital and operational costs. We were just talking about MTI earlier, talking about the programs that it requires a strong local driver, that it requires a strong, and is there historically an issue that you have the program will help you pay for the equipment, the pieces that you need, the capital investments and whatnot. And the reason the operationals were separate is that it needs to be driven by the local team. And now we're picking up part of that tab, thus more dependence on the state money and less on the local control of what is happening. I guess as far as before we jump entirely and say the committee's completely saying, yes, we should separate them, or we should to be able to use both, I would say that sometimes there's a pretty good reason why that doesn't happen. And perhaps some of the members that were here longer, but that would be my question, is that what I've heard is that it really needs to be driven and locally operationally driven and will help with everything else.
I think they're like 2 or 3 year grants. I mean, we have a list of what they are, and they're kind of interesting and varied. Like, it's not all like getting a new bus or something. Some of them are like planning processes and, right, I mean, last year we had a pretty and
But if they go to employee costs, when they go to year in, year out operational, guess what happened in the next year now that we've committed to funding a position or a part of a position? Now we're back to, but now there's positions relying on that money versus that local decision. Perhaps I'm misunderstanding it, but there's a pretty significant difference between capital and operational costs. And I feel like we're pushing that through pretty quickly in terms of our responsibility. No, not quickly. That was the right choice of words.
I
I'm
think we
sorry.
can hear back from the agency too, but yeah, I hear, Representative Burke.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that whole thing, like, you might get a grant and have this great program start. And then not have the funding continue it. You know, that's the other concern, like if you might have great local involvement, but not enough money to continue the program. So I think that's the whole thing about the operational, my understanding. You know, you might, like, I'm looking over the list of the grant awardees, you know, walk, bike, roll, mode shift program, you know, different programs that are innovative. That's the whole point of the thing. These are innovative solutions. But then what do you do once you sort of got the program? What do you do? How do you keep it going? How do you make it part of the whole system? I think so I think that speaks right to your, who's going to pay for the operations?
Then it becomes,
Yeah.
what does it become at
Right.
that point? And what's it dependent
I think
upon at
that's-
that point?
I
And
think that's really.
what that measurement of success versus what it returns.
Yeah.
But now we're on the hook for continued potentially or not, but
Well,
that's, I guess,
I
what I'm
mean,
getting
maybe
at.
we
the
give
difference
like,
between-
maybe if we operational, maybe we give operations for a couple of years or something like that, you know, noted. I don't know. I feel like I don't have enough information to say. I'm just sort of speculating. But I do know that difference, like when you get a grant, sometimes you can get a grant for a project, but then you still have to, you know, pay for everything else. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, we have got some good testimony from Ross. I mean, we have a couple of pilot projects that have happened that are actually filling a gap that public transit wasn't able to fill. So they're you know, there are a couple of 2 and 3 year pilot projects, and, you know, it seems to me that some of those, Michelle, if I'm mistaken, like some of those are operational costs, right? I mean, for like
Yes, and the microtransit projects are a little different than maybe some of the other things we would fund with MTI funding, in that if we have a successful microtransit pilot, we are able to pull in the FTA funds to be part of the mix on an ongoing basis for the microtransit, which operates sort of under a similar set of guidelines as a regular transit service would, in terms of our ability to use federal funds for operations. There are some things out there, like if you're running a bike repair shop or something like that, that just pull it out of here. We would not have a federal source for running operations of the staff to do that particular activity. The other thing I'm going to be finding out for you tonight is, and I think this probably came up in Andrea's conversation, the $3 million that is proposed to be included is going to be from the carbon reduction program funds. And are those federal guidelines allowing for both capital and operations? So I think, when you think about the MTI, it's a great way to sort of highlight the viability of a number of types of things, including microtransit. And if you can come up with a viable microtransit system that has maybe a similar cost per person of ridership than the types of transit services we offer today, or lower, that can then become part of our transit environment versus sort of get it off the initial MTI funding. So MTI is really a launch place.
And then you kind of like if it's a viable project, it may or may not graduate to another place. So it's not an automatic.
Right, it's not like years and years of MTI, you know, it's kind of like a bike ped grant. I mean, you design a project, you build the project, you're done with that project, you move on to something else.
That's very helpful, I think, to help kind of from this discussion.
Well, I just wanted to say that select boards are naturally conservative bodies and they are looking all the time at the bottom line, as they should be in our towns. But there is the capital budgeting process, you know, that is part of what a lot of select boards are opting to do. And I think there's as we are trying to transition to more walking and biking, more emissions options of all types, there's a lot of merit in giving towns the opportunity to try out these things and see which ones might be right for them. And then hopefully they will take them on themselves if they're successful. There's gonna be some things that just don't work out, obviously. But it's you know, the default in a lot of towns is to be just very conservative about trying new things because they've got challenging budget situations. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there as, you know, the value of this, these monies, the opportunities that it advances.
So how about I suggest this, that when we come back, the agency will come back and we'll hold off on about the awards being available for capital and operational adding into the mix until we get that information. And we need to think about in the context of the our budget. How does that sound? So, yeah. Okay.
Okay, that takes us to Amtrak. So this was the language that required the agency to make a request of Amtrak to do a number of different things. And then the agency needed to file 2 written reports on the efforts and the anticipated outcomes. And the things that the requests were supposed to be addressing was the feasibility of adding additional daily service in the southbound direction on the Vermonter for some or all of the service areas, the feasibility to expand service on the Valley Flyer to provide increased service on the Vermonter route, and the feasibility to have bicycle storage increase on both trains in Vermont between April 1 and October 31st. In that document that we were already working on, Representative Shaw's section 15 proposal, there is also going to be on the back, so flip it over. And thank you, Jeannie, she's now updated it on your website. So if you were looking at it on the committee page, it now says proposal sections 15 and 18. If you look at page 2, you will see what Representative Shaw is proposing. You will see no highlighting, so it looks like there are no changes, but that's because so much of it was changing that it was just easier to say, this is a complete replacement. So you don't see the differences highlighted. Instead of it saying, Agency of Transportation make this request of Amtrak, instead it's telling the Agency of Transportation as it's developing the new Vermont Rail Plan to consider and address the following. And the 2 things that are listed are the same 2 things that were the first 2 requests. So adding additional daily service in the southbound direction on the Vermonter and expanding service on the Valley Flyer to provide increased service on the Vermonter route. And then the second thing that the agency needs to do is to coordinate with Amtrak, including the state, and I learned this new acronym, the State Amtrak Intercity Passenger Rail Committee, SAIPRC, on passenger education and sufficient capacity for bicycle storage on Amtrak trains on those 2 trains in Vermont between April 1 and October 31st of each year. And then the agency needs to provide an oral update on the development of the new Vermont Rail Plan in general, the specific requirements that are listed related to those 2 extension of services, and the coordination efforts required under subsection B, that's related to the bicycle storage. And that needs to be filed with the House and Senate, or given to the House and Senate committees not later than February 15th of 2025. You might be thinking this is later in the session than we would want this oral update, but remember 2025 is the first year of a biennium. So you're going to probably have new people on your committee, and then it's going to be a weird thing that has this like mandatory oral update. I think if you were to change it to a written report and not an oral update, then you could have it be due earlier, because that's just something that's provided to the committee, not something that they need to come in and listen to. Alternatively, you could say the Agency of Transportation shall make itself available to provide an oral update not later than, and you could have it be earlier in the session. I just wouldn't want the agency to say, we can't, provide this update to you because we're so busy giving you all of the great, primer information that you get in the first year of a biennium. So that was just some of the thought process on that date. I changed from Rep. Shaw's proposal.
So this, as Cynthia said, it's real similar language, but it takes Amtrak out of the equation and throws the job to the agency as they develop something that they're already working on as their new rail plan. And I just thought it would be easier if the agency looked through this and came back to us, and then we got that really cool acronym plex that we learned about in testimony on the bicycle and educating people how to use their websites. So I think basically saying that language, that one of the big differences, instead of filing 2 written reports as the rail plan gets developed, and it won't be completed, I'm sure, by next February, but as it's getting developed, you can get an oral report on that in case you have to make any sideways moves, adjust anything that we can do. So it's working.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my initial thoughts or maybe concerns is just the fact that we just received a $500,000 grant for the feds to sort of lay out our plan, and we know which 2 that they pick, So does this sort of circumvent that or undermine that? They know that they want to extend, hopefully, priority 2 with,
I wonder which one that is.
Bennington over to Rensselaer, and the other one was, Montreal, Burlington to Montreal. So they have that plan. So, I mean, what good, we know what direction they're going in. I guess the only thing I would personally might want to add is just maybe the bike, look at the bike stores, but we know what their plan is. They have a.
My thought there, and that's the plan they presented to us.
Yeah.
Just kind of like there's some questions here that I thought that committee members needed to have answered, like expansion of the Valley Flyer. We heard some testimony from Vandelabri about it, that would be a really difficult thing to talk about. I'm not asking them to put a line on a piece of paper, but coming back to us say we can or we can't. Is the answer predetermined? I have no idea, but without asking the question, we can't get an answer. And on the other piece, the southbound direction of Vermont for somewhat all the service area, that's on the same line. So it's not an expansion of the rail plan. It's on using the current plan, but they may be being able to expand the service on the current plan. So that's where I came from on that time.
Yeah, no, definitely, Harry. I just don't want to.
You want to get circumvented, didn't it?
Well, I just don't want to we know what direction they have, $500,000 and their focus is.
I want the rest of sort of Bennington too. So that
I don't want to undermine anything, like sort of doing with Rail Valley and everything else.
Yeah.
So I guess
but,
I just wanted to comment though, I think we heard 2 things. It's almost like 2 parallel tracks. One is like the infrastructure that's needed for the Bennington line and for the Montreal line. There's track work that's needed. And then with this new money to identify corridors, it's about service that's already existing and how to make greater connectivity possible within a service. So I guess I would never want to see us undermine the rail plan that we have, but to encourage the agency to work with Amtrak to see what are some things that could be done to increase or add service for Vermonters. So I hear you loud and clear. I would agree with that, but I see Michelle gesturing it. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify the 2 things that are going on, which are on a parallel track. The rail plan is the periodic update. We have to do it every 5 years. And the rail plan is where we would investigate things that are of a very preliminary nature that we might just be sort of sketch planning information about to get it on the radar, to get it ready for future consideration once we work on the priorities that have already been established. The corridor ID process is for things that have already been established, and it's to develop, to better understand any additional infrastructure needs, the service planning element of like what a timetable would look like, what's the number of stops, what's the population centers, there's a whole list of things that happen in the corridor ID process. So the rail plan is where we would look at like the Valley Flyer extension, that sort of thing. And then the corridor ID process has already been dedicated to looking at the Green Mountain line and the Montreal service. And so that's just a sort of, it's a little confusing because the two are happening simultaneously.
So what would this, do you see, is this directing, is this clear?
I have not read that thing.
Okay.
It just got posted, so I haven't seen it. So I'll have to bring back comments on the language tomorrow.
Okay. That'd be, yeah.
You're gonna love it, Michelle.
Representative Pouch and Representative Dodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we'd like to see, how it would fit into the planning. And I would certainly support that, but I would add not only, connecting down into Massachusetts on that line with, let's just say it's a twice a day thing instead of now it's just once. I see the same thing going to Albany, from that side of the state. Because you're trying to get onto a line that's running more often. And so I would almost see, two things to be looking at in that vein of what would it take, what would the stops be, how would they do it, where's the train that would do it? I mean, it's pretty complicated, but
Okay.
I would like to see, both of those pieces looked at. Maybe one has more ridership and makes more sense, and that's okay.
Right, and we heard like that there's some, like there are different levels of look, like some is a lighter touch that's less expensive to look at, but yeah, what I'm hearing, I want to, Representative Dodge had her hand up, but I just want to say like, it sounds like though, that there's from the conversation that there's interest in bringing some kind of language into the T-bill to address this. We're going to get some thoughts from the agency about how that this language can align with that intent of the committee. Is that? And we'll make a final decision. Representative Dodge, sorry to keep you waiting.
No worries. And this is just a quick question about the shift from the language that was originally in 693 that said, the feasibility to increase bicycle storage versus the language being proposed now that just says sufficient capacity. So instead of kind of having the starting point that we don't have enough and we need more, this is a study on like what would be sufficient capacity. Is that the shift? Am I getting that language?
Yes.
Okay, and so I would just say, like, is there a way to evaluate how much that would affect ridership or bring in more revenues or, kind of weighing those things. And like if I had to judge, I would say it's probably, I would prioritize extending lines, adding daily trips over investing a lot in expanding bike storage.
Okay.
But I think in the original, if I may.
Yeah.
And just, I think that the language in 693 doesn't say do it, it says to get the
The feasibility,
feasibility
yeah.
of just doing.
I was
So,
just saying, I was just saying that there's a slight nuance shift in where you're, here, like in the original language, the perspective is we
Well,
want
I
to
don't
see
say
if we can increase it.
Perfect, we could say we need 12 spaces or
Right.
20 spaces.
Right, so what would
Because we
sufficient?
don't have any data about how many times people ask to bring a bicycle on board that they can't. And I'm thinking the organization that we call out. Probably could help us answer that question as they look nationwide. Amount of bicycle storage use, various amounts across the country in areas similar to ours. Metro Boston or rural New Hampshire, places like that.
Yeah.
So what's sufficient? I don't know, that we
Sure, we'll find out.
I agree with that.
I like that. Would it help if it said on passenger education and determining sufficient capacity?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so this is. Any more discussion on this? So the sensing from the committee, like, there's interest in this, we just need to do some. Get a little bit more. Feedback, make sure that this language. Does what we're hoping it would do. Without undermining the transit thing, okay?
Don't knock off Bennington.
So for purposes of Representative Shaw has 2 pages, 2 proposals. I have for section 15, it's gonna get rolled in, but subsection B is gonna say it's part of the January 1, 2025 report that's already required under Act 55. And then for the substitute for section 18 as a intermediary step, I am adding the word determining on line 12 before sufficient. You are waiting to hear from the agency on whether or not there needs to be any language tinkering to the balance of it.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, that sounds good, and
Okay.
we decide when we get another next.
Yeah.
But you know
What to do with it.
You know what to do.
Great. Okay, the next few sections in 693, which of course it now scrolled back to the top of the document. So section 19 is going to be at the bottom of page 33. So section 19, 20, and 21 all deal with money in one way or another. Section 19 is changing it so that 50% of the Transportation Alternatives Grant Program doesn't need to go to the environmental mitigation projects such as like salt sheds. Section 20 was appropriating, if it was in the T-bill, it would be authorizing a increase in the amount of money available for the bicycle and pedestrian facilities grants. And then 21 is increasing the amount of money that goes to the downtown, I never get the name right, the Downtown Transportation and Related Capital Improvement Fund. When you typically see the big bill, that is where the transfer is. It's transferred from the transportation fund. And I believe it has been this $533,000 amount. It had been quite a bit higher many years ago. More recently, it was 433,000, and then it was bumped to 533, and it's been held there. Logan, has it stayed? We believe that it has stayed. That is probably one of the things you're going to be asked to comment on when you comment on the big bill language. So these 3 sections all deal with like money for downtowns, pedestrians, bicycle facilities.
Maybe just real quick, I think we had some discussion about the Transportation Alternatives Program, and there were some questions that the committee had about limiting, concerns, like after we heard some testimony about taking money away from clean water. But I guess let's just hold on to it because we also had some discussions with Doug Farnham about potentially, and we want to get some information of whether ARPA money can be used here. So I'm just going to keep it there as a placeholder. I would suggest like we'll come back to this. Good. Okay.
Okay. So section 22, this is the language that required the agency to, in subsection A, do a number of things related to complete streets and complete street standards. And I'm going to get the phrasing wrong, pattern book, design guidelines by July 1 of 2025. That was in subsection A. And part of that was incorporating them into the replacement to the Vermont state standards. So those are, you shall do these things and put them into the Vermont state standards or documents that go along with the Vermont state standards. So that's like idea 1. Subsection B, idea 2, in meeting the requirements of subsection A, the Agency of Transportation needs to, and then I would say that the balance of subsection B is laying out what the public outreach requirements would be. So if you remember, we talked about how the Vermont state standards were adopted as a rule under the APA. That means there are certain requirements for public outreach and the like responsiveness summary and responding to things and making versions available. So subsection B is the, I would call like in lieu of APA. This is your public outreach requirements. And then subsection C is providing written updates on progress in meeting the requirements of subsection A, not later than November 15th of 2024 and March 1 of 2025. You have a proposal from your chair that would basically get rid of the first piece. So you do not have, Jeannie, you have Rep. Coffey and Rep. Burke's proposals swapped, I believe. Yes, so you just need to switch the names of them. So do not click, if you're electronically, do not click on the one that says Rep. Coffey, click on the one that says Rep. You click on the one that says Rep. Coffey, it'll take you to Rep. Burke.
Printed, the printed copy.
Yeah, if you have the printed copy, it'll say section 22 at the top of it. So the lead-in for what will be subsection A has changed, and it's just saying in preparing the replacement for the Vermont state standards, this is the process that you're going to do. Nothing about the process has changed. So the draft needs to be released. They need to conduct at least 5 public hearings. They need to provide a public explanation for why they didn't decide to make changes based on comments. That's language is taken from the APA. And then the consultation in subdivision 4 hasn't changed. And then the updates are in subsection B, very similar to what was in the bill as proposed, but instead of it's the updates on progress in meeting subsection A, it's just saying provide written updates on the progress in preparing the replacement to the Vermont state standards, including under the process, the public outreach process. Like, how is this public outreach process going? And in the bill, as it was introduced, it didn't say who the updates should go to. This is now saying the House and Senate Committees on Transportation, and the dates haven't changed. So stripping out everything that was required in subsection A, and instead just focusing on the public outreach process, and then having the written update on the progress in preparing the replacement to the Vermont state standards.
So maybe I can just say, just really briefly, because 4 o'clock is a hard stop, but we did hear, you know, we have a lot riding on the Vermont state standards. We got some on the updates. We got some terrific updates from the agency. And so there are some parts that we just let go of because they are doing, we heard they're doing a lot of this work. But I think also, since the legislature will not be approving or disapproving of the standards that we wanted, this committee's been talking a lot about these things, and wanting to ensure that there's public engagement, and that there's engagement with other folks, like the VLCT, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, the RPCs, I think, regional commissions, Transportation for Vermonters, a association of retired persons. So that language is just there. And, we heard from the agency that the date of that, they can report on the progress of January 15th. So that was not that seemed to be in alignment, but this is essentially the language that was in 693 with like half of the section B on down as Anthea described. So
keeping the process, but not being prescriptive on the contents.
So what are the committee's thoughts on this? I know it's getting late, but people want to pull this into this language, people comfortable. I know it feels like we're rushing, but we have seen this language now several times, and we've gotten comments from the agency. So this proposal is just trimming down the language. Yeah, you think it's okay for folks? Representative Walker?
I have a question.
Sure.
On the 22A, number 3, provide a publicly available written explanation. Is that, by understanding that, just an explanation of why they decided to do what they're doing? In effect,
think so.
is that what we decided that the rule was this and the reason was whatever? Is that what do you envision that looks like?
I think like an A&R has a similar kind of process, like.
So this comes from the Administrative Procedure Act. So they need to say when an adopting agency is adopting a rule, they need to basically provide what's called a responsiveness summary to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. And it doesn't mean they have to do what the commenter says, but like I can show you a stack of rules and it'll say like, we received this general comment because they don't need to respond to it each time. but like, we received this comment about like, so the wake boat rule is
Yeah.
being looked at right now. We received a comment that the distance should be 1,000 feet. This is why we're having it be a different number of feet, and this is the explanation for it. But it doesn't say they need to change it. They're just, I always describe it as showing their work.
That's good education for all of us to
Yeah.
know, right? Yeah. So what did you say? It's a standard practice across?
So it's a requirement of the Administrative Procedure Act.
Okay. Learn something new every day. Okay. Other questions? On this? Representative.
It looks like we're not, requiring anything about, or any complete streets ideas. And however we term them in the updates to the state standards. Am I understanding that correctly?
I would say that we've incorporated some of that in previous legislation that we've passed and, and I think complete streets is, we've gotten testimony, pretty extensive testimony from the agency that they are doing that and they're calling it mobility. Is that fair to say mobility for all? No, it's not mobility for all. It's the other,
Sensitive design.
thank you, context sensitive design. So,
I would just say, Madam Chair,
Sure.
that the statutes are very clear on complete streets, and complete streets is not a design standard. Complete streets is a contextual approach to implementing various transportation treatments, we'll call them, sidewalks, roundabouts. There's a variety of ways you can do it to create the environment within which the context is a complete streets where all users feel comfortable using the transportation system.
Yeah.
The design standards will tell you, like, your, turning radius for a semi needs to be X.
Well, so I guess what I'm getting high up on is, I remember asking, I forget who it was, I think it might have been Joel, not sure, about the repaving this past year, this past summer, most of the Montpelier and Marshfield on Route 2, and noticing that it really wasn't very much more conducive to bike riding. The road wasn't very much wider. And it looked like it could have been. And I asked whether under sort of current standards that they would make it a little bit wider, and he said, no, probably not. So that's what I'm getting home on. Is there any way just for us to provide guidance to AOT to put more emphasis on that? That's what I'm getting.
Yeah, I understand what you're asking. I think every design of every project is tiered.
Sure.
So in other words, there may be constraints related to the underpinnings of that road, the distance to the stream,
Sure.
any variety of things that cause the width to be limited to whatever width they ended up at. Those are how they considered, like, the complete streets element related to that project is something they would have to document. So I think it's really a case by case situation, and I think it's incumbent upon us to have the standards, have the context sensitive direction to our engineers to help them understand what the outcomes are that we are looking for, recognizing that it can't happen in every situation. It's also incumbent upon communities to, within their transportation plans, within their design review process, within their participation in the projects that we are developing in their communities, to also participate in the process to make sure that if there are specific wishes, and this is where regional planning commissions are working on this bike ped integration project, so that we know it may not, when a project is coming through your community, we know what the community desires are for bike ped infrastructure in your community. So
Yeah,
it's
I'm not-
complicated, yeah.
I mean, obviously, every situation is different, but I'm just, in this particular situation, there are some towns that are 6, 7 miles apart, would be suitable for bike commuting if anybody wanted to. And so I guess I'm looking for a way for
So.
the legislature to provide that direction.
Yeah, so I think by some of the language here does require the agency to work with regional planning
Yeah,
commissions,
yeah.
AARP. We
Yeah.
know, the Vermont League of Cities Towns, but we've heard a lot of testimony over the last 2
Sure.
years from AARP
Yeah.
and from our RPCs, so I do think, about the importance of bikeable and walkable communities. So, I think that this does help, this language helps move that a little bit. Yeah, no, you can ask the question. You can, yeah. I'm sorry. Representative.
So Representative Walker, I have up on the screen from the Administrative Procedure Act, and you'll see subdivision 2 up there. This is what needs to be filed with the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules and you'll see that the language is very similar. I did not make this up, so. No, I know.
I thought it was interesting.
I think it's helpful to know that this is not,
It's not a new requirement. It's part of what.
well, rather not that it's not a new requirement. It is a new requirement to the establishment of the Vermont state standards, but it is not something that agencies are surprised by in the rulemaking process.
And I appreciate that. Thank you for the extra detail. When I hear Representative Campbell talk about what he's looking for somebody to answer why it didn't get wider. I mean, it seems like that's the feed. He wants to have that reason. And this is like a requirement of the reasons of why they chose certain standards. Not project specific, but it's the rule specific. You're explaining why you did or didn't do something you picked. It seems project specific, you want to be able to find out the reason that we did or didn't make it wider.
I was just using that as an example, that's all.
So I know we have to begin to close out. So I don't know. I mean, before Anthea has to run, do we need more discussion on this, or are people feeling like we can? You're good with it? You're good with it? Our folks, this is essentially section 22 of the bill. It's basically cut a lot of it down, but the language is mostly about asking for public engagement and public hearings and involving other folks. And it was language that was in 693, but edited down. And Michelle, is that a problem, doing any of that? Or are you going to look more closely?
I'd like to look at that one again, just to make sure. Listening to your conversation, I don't think there's any issues with what's been proposed.
Yeah, what you didn't. The first pass, it didn't, yeah, okay.
I have in my notes add star, but waiting on feedback from V-Trans.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, guys, this is great. This is good work today. We're really appreciate everybody's paying attention. And Anthea, thank you so much for doing that. So I think with that, we've had a pretty afternoon. So I want to be able to wrap up our work. And tomorrow, just would say that we're starting at 9 a.m. With Ian DeGustis of local speed limits. So that was actually kind of a good place for us to stop.
23, yeah, those are the local speed limits.
Yeah, so that'll set us up very section.
Bye, tomorrow.
Thank you. Anthea. All right, so with that, I think we can end our live stream.